All right, Alexander. So we have a lot to discuss with regards to Ukraine and what's going on in the east of Ukraine. And so the first observation that I'm going to throw by you is this. I believe that if nothing happens this week, i.e., if the Ukraine military doesn't break through the contact line and push forward deeper into East Ukraine, if Russia is not goaded into intervening in one way or another, then I believe that this story is all but dead. This narrative of Russia's going to invade and there's going to be war and all of this hysteria. I really believe that this is the week that either Ukraine's going to push further east and they're going to try to goad Russia into some sort of response, or the Donbass militia is going to hold the line, and it's just going to kind of be static and in a form of stasis, and then the diplomatic stuff will start churning, and I don't think people around the world are going to have any appetite for any more. Russia's going to invade on this day and on that day, and they're going to encircle Kiev. I mean,
Yeah.
these next 4 or 5 days are crucial.
I absolutely agree. I completely agree with all of this. This is entirely correct. By the way, just before we started on this program, I was reading an article by the indispensable Anatol Lieven, who essentially made exactly the same point as you. This is the week that will be the decisive week. And I'm quoting Anatol Lieven, if there isn't a broad, big war as a result of these events, then all of these people who have been talking it up over the last couple of months are going to look silly. His word, I should stress, not mine. But I entirely agree with that. And by the way, that leads on to some important observations, because as you absolutely rightly say, it all depends on whether Kiev's armed troops can break through the line of contact and, threaten the existence of the two republics, which of course gives Russia a huge incentive to make sure that doesn't happen. And of course, they don't need to go in openly and fight there, but they can do all sorts of things clandestinely to make sure that doesn't happen. And I suspect we're going to be seeing a lot of that over the next few days. So it's important to say this is the most dangerous moment. If you think it all started whilst the Munich Security Conference in Munich was going, and all these important people from all the Western powers, the security people, Scholz and Johnson and Baerbock and Zelensky were all there, all gathered together in Munich. If you think it was just chance, Blinken was also there, by the way. If you think it's just chance that all this happened, timed with the start of the Munich Security Conference, then I have a bridge to sell you, as I like to say. And note that both the Russians and the Chinese stayed away. The Russians didn't send anybody at all, which caused a lot of surprise and anger and dismay, because, of course, they would have been subjected to an orgy of abuse and criticism, and that was partly, I think, part of the plan. And Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, decided that he would attend, but only in a virtual fashion. So he's given a rather eerie virtual interview from his office in Beijing. So there you go. So this has all of the appearance of a piece of theatre. It's all looks incredibly staged. That doesn't mean it isn't highly dangerous. It doesn't mean that people aren't dying, because they are. It doesn't mean that fighting isn't going on and shelling isn't going on. I've been reading some extraordinary articles in parts of the Western media which are pretending that none of this is happening. Well, something certainly, most definitely is happening. I mean, there really is shelling. But if they can't achieve it this week, the media caravan will move on, because it's going to be very difficult to keep this thing going for very much longer. And that's entirely my view, and I agree with you. I agree with your analysis about this completely.
Yeah, I believe, real quick on what you just said, I believe that Zelensky and a lot of the mainstream media is downplaying the Ukraine attack.
Yeah.
because they want to make sure that the Ukraine forces can first break through and aren't stopped, because that would be very embarrassing. So I think they're just waiting to see if the Ukraine forces can break through. Then they'll start to report it as, a great victory and, a great advance for the Ukraine army to liberate the East. Oh, they'll frame it something like that.
Yes.
But until they see progress, I think they're just going to downplay it or not report it at all. That's one observation. Second quick question before we get into the current situation on the contact line and some of the diplomacy that's taking place this week. There is a bit of a grift in all of this as well from both sides. Zelensky was in Munich saying that Ukraine's going to go nuclear. So give me money. That was pretty much his grift. We're going to go nuclear unless you give us money. Also Donetsk and Lugansk have told Russia, we need military and we need money. So there's a bit of a grift going on here.
Absolutely.
Money-wise.
And can I just say something? I don't want to give the impression that I believe everything that any particular side is saying. I mean, you're already getting reports of some of these events, episodes on the Donetsk and Lugansk side have been staged. I don't exclude that possibility. It doesn't mean there isn't fighting and isn't shelling and people aren't being evacuated, but that they're milking this too, to try to get the Russians to open their coffers, their purses, and to provide them with help and also military support and all kinds of things. Of that, there's no question at all. I would say that undoubtedly, in my opinion, much more of this is going on the Ukrainian side. And I would also say that the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has ceasefire monitors on the line of contact, has now been providing reports, and I've been sort of looking through these reports, and I would say that they do appear to confirm not just that there's been a major escalation in the shelling, but when you look at the places where those shells are landing, it's quite clear that they're coming mainly from the Ukrainians, not from the other side. So I want to say that too. And I'm not talking about particular incidents that people are talking about. This is the OSCE monitors that are saying this, and I was unsurprised to read, in view of all of this, an article appearing in The Guardian that Ukraine is apparently complaining about what it calls bias on the part of OSCE monitors, which gives you some idea about what's actually happening. But fundamentally, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're completely right on all the points you made. They're downplaying this war because partly they don't want to anticipate a breakthrough before it happens, which would be embarrassing. And secondly, of course, they don't want at the moment to promote something which will contradict the narrative of a Russian invasion, of a pending Russian invasion of Ukraine. So they're downplaying what's happening in the Donbass precisely for that reason. And whilst we're on the subject of Ukraine's nuclear weapons, you're absolutely right. No chance of that. There is absolutely no possibility of Ukraine acquiring nuclear weapons. I mean, it might, in theory, have the scientists, but it really is in no position to acquire nuclear weapons. And even the Americans would freak out if it went down that road. And I just want to make a point because there's a particular piece of mythology that I see circulating all over the place, and many, many people, including many serious people, are falling for it, which is that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for the Bucharest memorandum. Ukraine never had any nuclear weapons. Never at any time did Ukraine possess nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons. Some of them were located on Ukrainian territory because, of course, Ukraine was a constituent republic of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union broke up and Russia emerged as the Soviet Union's successor state, control of all those nuclear weapons on Ukrainian territory passed to Russia, with the military units...
Kazakhstan and Belarus as well.
And Kazakhstan and Belarus, exactly. All of these places, they passed to Russia. So the Russian military that retained control of those nuclear weapons, and it was the Russian military which then transferred them to Russia. So Ukraine never gave away its nuclear weapons in return for the Bucharest memorandum, because it never had any to start with. You know, there's so much said about this, especially on the about the diplomacy and what happened in the past, that is simply untrue. That, you know, you can very easily lose your way, but the Bucharest memorandum is a piece of mythology altogether. I mean, it was just a document that the Americans got everybody to sign in the early 1990s because they wanted to stabilize the situation in Ukraine at the time. But I'm not going to get into a big debate about it, but it had nothing to do with Ukraine's retention of nuclear weapons. Ukraine certainly didn't surrender its nuclear weapons in return for it. It never had them in the first place.
Exactly. You can't surrender what you don't have.
Exactly.
Anyway, so this week we have on the 24th, we have Blinken meeting with Lavrov. We also have Putin supposedly is going to be meeting with Biden. I don't know exactly in what form that's going to take place. I don't even know if it's a 100% done deal either. All of this was brokered in a way by Macron, kind of. Macron has been doing a lot of diplomacy the last couple of days. I think 2 calls with Putin. What do you expect from these meetings? Once again, I think the fact that it's going to take place on the 24th, towards the tail end of the week, is another indication that the Biden White House and NATO is kind of saying, okay, let's wait and see how much the Ukraine army can advance, or if they can get something done before we open up our cards on the diplomacy front. I mean,
well, that's right.
You know, the next 2 days, everyone's waiting to see, can Ukraine break through and goad Russia into some sort of action? And if not, I guess Blinken will be sitting down with Lavrov, and I'm sure Lavrov will handle him.
I entirely agree with that, by the way. And I would add, I mean, just as Macron, it's been apparently Scholz is going to call Putin, and Le Drian, the French foreign minister, is calling Lavrov. I mean, they're all busy calling the Russians at the moment. And I would say something else. I've been reading the readouts that the governments have been publishing of all of these calls. And by the way, Macron spoke to Putin twice on Sunday. He spoke to Zelensky on Sunday. He spoke to Boris Johnson. He spoke to Biden for all of 15 minutes. His calls with Putin altogether went on for 2 hours and 20 minutes. With Biden, he spoke for 15. That gives you some idea. I mean, so anyway, he's been talking with everybody. But if you compare the French readouts would give you the impression that some grand diplomatic breakthrough is coming, that there's going to be this summit meeting between Putin and Biden. We don't know where and we don't know when. There's all going to be agreed by Lavrov and Blinken on Thursday. That there's going to be, after that, a major conference to discuss the security of Europe, all this grandiose stuff that Macron loves to talk about. Then you go to the Russian readouts, and they just drip cynicism. I mean, they are completely uncommitted about any of this. They say that Putin, again pointed out to Macron, the Ukrainians are not honoring Minsk II. They're launching all of these attacks. They're breaking the ceasefire. They've been armed with all these weapons to do that. There's no commitment from the Russians to a summit meeting with Biden. No public commitment. The French are talking about it. The Americans, to some extent, are talking about it. The Russians are keeping their powder on this one dry. They're also waiting to see what happens. And I think what the Russians will want is some indication over the next few days before Thursday, either that Ukraine is not breaking through, or that, the Ukrainian shelling is going to die down and something is going to happen to prevent it. Because, I think that the Russians have heard all sorts of fine words and interesting ideas and elegant concepts from Macron, but they've not yet seen any action And I think until they start to see action this time, they're not going to move forward with anything. A much more important meeting at the moment is this big meeting that's happening today, Monday, which is Putin is calling his Security Council together. As I've discussed many times, this is Russia's top policy-making body. There's going to be big decisions of some kind taking place there. There's going to be an enlarged meeting. We'll see what the Russians do. And that's really perhaps the meeting to focus on. I mean, everything else that's happening and being talked about, as I said, it's just so much theatre. And notice that President Biden, the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, what is he doing? Is he coming to Europe? Is he addressing the Munich Security Conference? Is he travelling to Ukraine? Is he working the phones? Is he, acting like you would expect the leader of the free world to do? No, he is leading the free world as he has formerly led his election campaign. Well, perhaps not from his basement, but from his office. I mean, he's again. I mean, he's
from a soundstage built across the street from the White House, Alexander.
Exactly. I mean, it's. I mean, to be straightforward, it's an abject performance, and if you look at his comments to the media, I mean, they're just all over the place. Apparently, when he said on Friday that he was convinced that Putin was going to invade, he actually went off script. He wasn't meant to say that. It just stumbled out somehow. I mean, it was just, I mean, it's unbelievable, but there it is.
Yeah, well, maybe he was feeling creative, in his performance, and he decided it's time to ad-lib some of this stuff.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is very much like Biden's campaign in 2020, which is just let the media run point and handle this show. You just deliver a few lines every now and then, and we'll take it over. Case in point, here's an excerpt from RT, which talks about CNN and the New York Times saying that Russian commanders have finalized invasion plans. On Friday, President Joe Biden announced that he believes his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, had made the decision, that's a direct quote, made the decision to invade Ukraine, and Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken reiterated that claim on Sunday. Outlets including CNN and the New York Times said on Sunday that Biden's claim was underpinned by U.S. intelligence reports that the Kremlin had already given invasion orders. I've heard the date, I've heard the end of February to be now the new date of an invasion. You've also had the media say that Americans living in St. Petersburg and Moscow should leave those cities because Russia is planning a false flag attack on its own citizens in order to provide it with pretext to invade Ukraine and take over Kiev. The intelligence reports that are saying this is going to happen have said it could happen in the metro station, in a restaurant, in a bar, on the street, in a cafe, pretty much anywhere. Maria Zakharova said, okay, if you have this information, shouldn't you notify people? Shouldn't you protect people's lives? Shouldn't you take this, I don't know, to the UN or somewhere and let people know that there's an attack on Russian citizens and foreigners living in Russia so that we can prevent the loss of life? Anyway, all of this, the media is really running with this. What do you make of these reports that are circling around? And real quick, Alexander, I also want you to comment on one thing that no one else talks about, that no one has talked about. March 1st is Biden's State of the Union. They have to get the narrative on point and wrap all of this up so that Biden can give that, corn pop, Scranton Joe, I saw Putin, I stared him down, and America is stronger than ever now because of me.
Well, that's entirely right. I mean, I think I agree with every single point that you've just made. And I mean, the fact that the State of the Union address is coming on that particular day is surely not part of the explanation, but a main part of the explanation of what's going on. By the way, I have to say, if this is all an elaborate attempt to try and, transform Biden's election prospects, boost his polling figures. It's not working. His polling numbers are still falling. And it's just that I just don't think most Americans are particularly engaged with this story. I mean, Ukraine is far away. It's been talked about now for so long. Putin has become so much part of the everyday furniture. I just don't think Americans are really connected to it. And of course, what they are connected to is the reality that when they go to the shops, prices are rising now at an incredibly fast rate. Energy prices, fuel prices are rising too. That's the sort of thing that people really care about. And of course, all the various restrictions which still exist and still affect people in their everyday lives. So, I mean, this is an artificial crisis. And you correctly said, this is largely a case of trying to, create a media story, an image of what's happening. I don't think it's working. There have been attempts to rally protests in various European capitals to bring people out onto the streets. That would have been a good indication of whether or not people were falling for this story. So far, just a few hundred people are turning up. I read that in Madrid, it was about 500, and most of them were, Ukrainians, not Spanish. Compare that with, I think, was it 1 million people turned up in Madrid at the time of the, in the run up to the Iraq War. So I mean, I don't think this media thing, this attempt to build him up into the new JFK, really interests people. You can't run a Cuban Missile Crisis type story with Biden over some place like Ukraine, which is so far away from the United States. Cuba was, on America's doorstep. And the fact that the Soviets had missiles there, it was real. I mean, people were worried. I mean, people were very, very frightened and alarmed. But all this was just so far and so remote. This is so far away and so remote that I just don't think it touches people in their everyday lives. I think this is, by the way, a problem that the Democrats have with a lot of the things that they've been doing. I think all the way back to the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton's campaign. It did strike me, she was talking all the time, Russia, 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 even in the 2016 campaign, whereas Donald Trump in that campaign was talking about things like immigration, employment, businesses, all those sort of things, crime, law and order, the sort of things that Americans care about and which directly touch their lives. But there it is. I mean, they will keep with this narrative going, I suppose, for as long as they can, and hope perhaps possibly that it will work for them. It doesn't seem to be showing much sign of doing so.
Okay, well, let's get into that. Is it working for him? What do you see from your reading of the situation? I read that, once again, this is from the Donbass militia side of things, that Ukraine is now underway with some big push, a big invasion into the east. They're going to make a big effort today. How do you see things?
Well, we'll just have to wait.
What's the readout that you're getting?
I mean, I that may very well be true. I have to say that the indications they were talking about that big push happening last night, and it didn't happen. It may happen today. I mean, I'm not able to judge or assess any of this. I think the Ukrainians need to handle this extremely carefully if that's what they want to do, because, of course, if they too obviously carry out an offensive like that, then, of course, this whole narrative construct it starts to break down, because then it looks like it's the Ukrainians who are advancing. And just a few hours before we made this program, Ukraine insisted that its units are still at their operative bases, that they're not advancing at all. So, I mean, they've got to handle this very carefully. But, of course, if they do make a push, then, of course, there will be a push back. Of that, I'm absolutely certain. But I would have thought that initially, at least, the Russians will try to limit it to the extent that they can to the area around the line of control and the Donbass. In other words, this big Russian counteroffensive, which, to be very clear, might eventually come. I don't think it's going to come soon. I think they will try to localize this whole situation and then see what's going to happen and see what happens with the sanctions and with the European reaction and all of those things. And here, by the way, there's a very, very interesting article in the Financial Times by Gideon Rachman, who is one of the most hardline anti-Russian journalists around in Britain, and we have lots of them, of course, here. But it was very interesting because he described the situation at the Munich Security Conference. And I don't want to perhaps read more into what he said, but the very clear impression I got was that behind the facade of all the great speeches, Johnson, Zelensky, Scholz, Blinken, all of them talking, in their way, Baerbock, who I said became utterly intoxicated and was all over the place in some of the things that she was saying. Behind all of that, in the sort of halls and corridors, apparently there were intense conversations, which I read as intense rows, with all sorts of people arguing bitterly about what was happening. Europeans still pushing back on what the Anglosphere is trying to push onto them, because they don't want to see a complete severance of relations with Russia, obviously. And so that there was behind the scenes, there's lots of cracks and doubts and uncertainties. And I also read in Reuters a couple of days ago that there's some agreement now about the kind of sanctions that should be imposed. There's no agreement yet on what would trigger those sanctions. So if, let us say, we start to see Russian military or volunteers from Russia enter the Donbass and push the Ukrainians back, that might make some people in Europe say, well, this isn't a big enough event to trigger the full range of sanctions that some people are talking about. And I'm sure the Russians are following all of that, and they might want to wait and see and test the water first before they go full on and, move to smash the Ukrainian army outright and do those sort of things.
Yeah, Putin said that in a statement the other day that Russia is sanction proof. In essence, he said that. So, are there any sanctions that you think could do damage to Russia? And do you think the big one, which is Nord Stream 2, do you think that a cancellation of Nord Stream 2 would be dependent upon an invasion of Ukraine proper, or do you think it would just require any type of Russian intervention? My own personal belief is that at this point, any type of Russian action, I think they could spin it and gin it up into at least challenging Nord Stream 2's viability in a very serious way. Any type of Russian intervention at this point.
I'm going to say straight away, I think until a couple of days ago, the Germans might have been able to hold out on Nord Stream 2 if the Russians had limited themselves to doing what I said they might do in the Donbass itself. But after Baerbock's performance in Munich, and I don't think this was calculated. I think she got swept along in the general hysteria. You remember, she's young, she's inexperienced, she's very Atlanticist in her instincts. She wants to be popular with the Anglo-American audience, which is the one that she's attracted to. After that, I think it's going to be all but impossible for the Germans to hold the line. So my own personal view is that if there's even a small movement of Russian volunteers into Donbass, one of the first things that will go will be Nord Stream 2. I think the chances of this pipeline ever coming into service now are almost zero. I have to say that. I mean, if this whole thing was partly intended to achieve that, I think it's almost succeeded. I think it's very close to succeeding. Don't think it's going to make the difference that some people think. I don't think it's going to save Ukraine's position as a transit state. I was listening very carefully to what Putin said when Scholz was in Moscow. And Putin said, yes, of course, we are ready to continue to send gas via Ukraine, provided all sorts of conditions are met. And when you went through the conditions that he set out, they were conditions which Ukraine will never meet. So Ukraine's future as a transit state is almost ended. And Europe will just get less gas, and it will go instead to China, which seems to me bad for Europe. It'll take the Russians will not, I think, suffer very much of a hit from it, because whatever they lose, they will make up in higher gas prices. And the big beneficiaries in the end, as always, will be the Chinese.
Can I make a final observation? And I was thinking about Nord Stream 2 and the fact that it's going to get pulled with even the slightest Russian action in Ukraine. Maybe no action at all. They'll figure out, once again, they'll use their soft power in the media to figure out a way to spin it so that Russia did something with regards to Ukraine, whatever happens, real or not real. At this point, I think reality doesn't even matter anymore. It's going to be liberating for Russia, isn't it?
Yeah,
if Nord Stream 2 is just canceled and done with. And my sense is that I could see like the Kremlin, everyone in the Kremlin just kind of saying, okay, finally, this thing is canceled. We can move on. And not only can we move on, what actions do you think Russia can then take with regards to Ukraine and everywhere else in the world, Syria? I don't know, because you don't have Nord Stream 2 to worry about anymore. As a matter of fact, you don't even need to care about your European partners, the word that they like to use often, our partners in Europe. That doesn't even matter that much, does it?
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it goes even further than that. I think, and I'm sure there are people in the Kremlin who are saying this to each other, and not just in the Kremlin. In all the, the policy think tanks and ministries across Moscow. They're saying to each other, with these sanctions, just bring them on, all of them. I mean, we will take a hit, but we will absorb that hit, just as we did when similar sanctions were imposed in 2014. At the end of the day, it will be liberating. The Americans have already said that these sanctions are the top of the escalatory ladder. There's nothing further that the US can realistically do beyond this. So let it happen. Let it be done. Let's carry on with our reorganization and our restructuring of our economy. Let's go ahead, forge our relations, our economic ties with China. And as I said, that will mean that our hands are once again free. All that these things are doing at the moment is that they're tying us down. They're making it difficult for us to act independently as we would like to do, because we're constantly having to keep an eye out on what the Americans might do. So I think there are people I'm absolutely sure that there are people in Moscow who are saying this to each other. And if you listened to Putin's comments when he had that press conference with Lukashenko on, I think it was Friday, he said essentially the same thing. He said, that what we got to do is we got to focus on economic sovereignty. Sanctions are going to come anyway. We can deal with them. We can cope with them. Let's have them, bring them on, and then, we'll take a hit. But after that, we're free.
Yeah. I mean, even an event like the Olympics where they went after Valieva, the 15-year-old ice skater, even that to me is like, just this is your chance to absorb those sanctions, take the hit, and just be out of the entire globalist neoliberal structures
Absolutely.
and framework. I mean, this could be like Russia's chance to just be done with all of it. I mean, all of it, from the Olympics to WHO to the Munich Security Conference and Davos, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Just be done with all of it and be free.
Absolutely. I as I said, I have no doubt that there are people in Moscow who are saying this. I mean, there's still those lingering voices, or at least there were those lingering voices, that said, Russia should try and work out its relationship with Europe. It's a European country, all those sort of things. Putin, of course, was very, very keen on all of that. back in the early 2000s. I think the hysteria of the last few months has coming after, remember, the hysteria over Russiagate, which Russians have not forgotten. I think all that's finally convinced them that, let the Americans go with sanctions to the top of their escalatory ladder. And then, as I said, we're free. I mean, just as we've been in the past, so we can be again. And next time, when the West comes to us, we can deal with them from a position of, economic sovereignty and independence.
But from like a geopolitical standpoint, or from the standpoint of the Kremlin, what do you think that would mean for Russia? I mean, what does that freedom? What does that give Putin and his team? What do you think that gives them, with regards to, like I said, Ukraine, with regards to Syria, with regards to dealing with Europe? I mean, they can just. I imagine they can just be more straightforward, more forthright. Stop using the word partner. Talk about their demands, do what they want to do, and just not worry.
Well, they could be a lot more assertive in their foreign policy than they've been at the moment. I mean, the way the media in the West and Western governments have been talking about things, it's as if the Russians have been very assertive with their foreign policy. On the contrary, over the last 20 years, they have been incredibly restrained. That's the truth of it. That's one thing that they can do. But of course, the other thing that they can do, and the other thing that they will do, is that they'll start to take steps within their domestic economy and within their social structures, and social mechanisms, which up to now they've held back from doing. One example, and it might, I'm not predicting this will happen, but of course, if, for example, they were to start to take serious steps against American social media companies, Twitter, Facebook, all of those, well, there wouldn't be any real costs anymore, as there might have been had this been done, say, a year or two ago.
Right. All right. Let's see. This week, this will be the big week.
It is the big week. It is the big week. I'm going to go even a bit further. I'd say that if we don't see some big event in the Donbass before Thursday, before Lavrov and Blinken meet, then the danger of such a thing happening starts to diminish. So we'll see what happens. And the fact that there was rows and arguments, I want to stress that's my take on Gideon Rachman's article. That's not exactly what he said, but reading between the lines, that was definitely the impression I got. But that suggests to me that there are still some people in Europe, in France, in Germany, in Italy, undoubtedly, in Austria, who are utterly horrified by the direction of events and are trying to keep this, to bring this runaway train, as it must seem to them, to a stop. But we'll see what happens. As I said, the time window, now we really are now in the critical time window, and we'll see what happens. We'll be covering
All right, we'll be covering it. The Duran.locals.com, everybody, and Duran Shop. Use the code GOODDAY. Get 10% off all merch. There's the mug. Take care.